My name is Gabriella Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a logistics technician for a regional maintenance contractor in Phoenix. My life runs on structure. Not because I lack emotion, but because structure keeps everything contained, predictable, clean. It's how I make sense of things when they start to blur. Most of my days are practical. Systems, schedules, breakdowns that need fixing before they become bigger problems. I deal with things people don't usually notice until something goes wrong. I've never been embarrassed by that. Daniel Carter is different. He's 32, works in public relations for a hospitality group. His life doesn't follow a schedule, it flows. Late nights, networking events, conversations that stretch longer than they should, moments that don't always have clear edges. Where I build systems, he builds impressions. At the beginning, I thought that contrast made us stronger. Balance, we called it. We had been together just over 4 years, living together for 2. No kids, a shared routine that looked stable from the outside, even if it wasn't always as seamless as it seemed. The situation that started everything happened about 2 months ago. Daniel invited me to a small staff gathering at one of the restaurants his company managed. It was informal, something about closing early for staff appreciation. He sounded excited, almost eager for me to meet the people he worked with. I don't usually go to those kinds of events, but I said yes. I came straight from work that evening. I hadn't changed. Still wearing my work boots, my company shirt, hair tied back in a way that made sense for long days, but not for social rooms filled with polished conversations. I noticed the difference immediately when I walked in. The lighting was softer than it needed to be. Conversations layered over each other in a way that felt practiced. Everyone looked intentional. And then there was me. At one point, we were standing near the bar with 3 of his coworkers. Someone asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Daniel laughed. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough. She's basically the person you call when everything breaks and nobody else can figure it out, he said. Like, if your whole system goes down, she's the one fixing it behind the scenes. Everyone laughed. On the surface, it sounded harmless, almost like a compliment if you didn't listen too closely. But I did, because it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. The slight tilt of his head, the way he glanced at them afterward, waiting for that reaction, the subtle shift that turned something factual into something lighter, smaller. Like my work wasn't something to state plainly. It needed to be packaged, framed, softened into something easier to digest. I didn't react. I just smiled, then explained my job in a straightforward way. Logistics systems, infrastructure coordination, maintenance contracts across multiple properties. The conversation moved on. But that moment stayed with me the entire night. Not because of the words, because of the intention behind them. On the drive home, Daniel was in a good mood. He talked about work, about how things were picking up, about potential expansions and opportunities. His energy filled the car like nothing had happened, like I hadn't noticed. When we got home, I didn't wait. Why did you say it like that? I asked. He looked at me, confused for half a second. Say what? My job, I said. Why turn it into a joke instead of just saying what I do? He laughed. Not cruelly, not sharply, just dismissively. Gabriella, come on, he said. It was just a joke. I held his gaze. It didn't feel like one. He shook his head, walking past me toward the kitchen like the conversation was already over. You're overthinking it. That word settled in the room. Overthinking. I followed him. If someone asked about you at my workplace, would you want me to describe you like that? He paused, then turned slightly. It's not the same. How? He hesitated. Just long enough. People in my industry care about image, he said finally. It's just how things are. Something about that answer stayed with me, because it wasn't really an explanation. It was a justification. I didn't push further that night. I told myself it was small, not worth turning into something bigger. But after that, I started paying attention. And once you start noticing patterns, it becomes impossible to unsee them. After that night, nothing changed on the surface. Daniel still came home late some evenings, still told stories about work with that same effortless confidence, still moved through conversations like everything fit exactly where it was supposed to. But something in me had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, just awareness. I started listening more carefully, watching small moments I would have ignored before. And once I did, the pattern wasn't subtle anymore. It showed up in the way he described things about our life, depending on who he was talking to. If someone asked where we lived, he would say we were in between places, deciding what area to settle in long term. It sounded intentional, forward-moving. Technically, it wasn't a lie. But we weren't actively looking to move. We had renewed our lease 3 months earlier. If someone asked about my work, he rarely said it directly. He'd say I worked with systems or operations or infrastructure coordination, words that sounded more polished, less grounded. At first, I thought he was simplifying. Then I realized he was editing, shaping, removing anything that didn't fit the version of himself he wanted, reflected back. About 2 weeks after the restaurant gathering, he brought a couple of coworkers home after a late shift. It was close to midnight. I had work early the next morning, so I stayed for about 15 minutes, just enough to be polite, introduce myself, sit through the beginning of whatever conversation was forming. One of them asked how Daniel and I met. Before I could answer, he jumped in. Through mutual friends, he said smoothly, back when she was already working across multiple commercial properties. That part was true. But then he added, with that same tone I had started to recognize, "She basically keeps half the city running behind the scenes." They laughed. Again. It wasn't the exact same joke as before, but it landed the same way. I noticed one of them glance down at my boots, then back at Daniel. A quick, almost unconscious movement. That moment told me everything. Not about them. About him. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, excused myself, and went to the bedroom. But I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over, trying to understand something that no longer felt accidental. Because once might be a joke, twice starts to look like intention. And intention says something about how someone sees you when they think it matters. A week later, it happened again. This time it was quieter, smaller. Just two of his coworkers stopping by for a quick drink after a shift. I was still awake, sitting at the table finishing up some paperwork from earlier that day. One of them asked how long we'd been together. Daniel answered normally. 4 years, living together for 2. Then the same coworker turned to me. "And what do you do?" Before Daniel could speak, I answered. "I'm a logistics technician. I manage systems and maintenance coordination for multiple commercial properties. Simple, direct, accurate." Daniel smiled slightly, then let out a small laugh. "Yeah, she's basically the one you call when everything starts falling apart," he added. "Like if nothing else works, she fixes it." They laughed. I didn't. I looked at him, not angry, not raising my voice, just steady. That's not really accurate," I said calmly. "I manage full operational systems across multiple sites. It's more than just fixing things when they break." The room went quiet, just for a second. One of his coworkers nodded slowly. "That actually sounds pretty solid." Daniel's expression shifted. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice, but I did, because I was looking for it now. The slight tightening around his eyes. The pause before he smiled again. He didn't say anything in that moment. The conversation moved on. Drinks finished. They left not long after. But the second the door closed, he turned to me. "Why did you have to make that awkward?" His tone wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I held his gaze. "I didn't make anything awkward. I explained what I actually do." "You corrected me in front of them," he said. "That's unnecessary." "Why?" I asked. "Because I described my own job accurately?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Gabriella, sometimes you just have to keep things light." I felt something settle into place at that moment. "Light," I repeated. He nodded. "Exactly. So light means turning my work into a joke?" "That's not what he started, then stopped, clearly frustrated. "You're doing it again. You're overthinking something small." There it was again. Small. Overthinking. The same language. The same dismissal. And suddenly, it wasn't confusing anymore. Because the problem wasn't that he didn't understand. It was that he didn't see anything wrong with it. I leaned back slightly, studying him in a way I hadn't before. "Let me ask you something," I said quietly. He didn't respond, just waited. "If it's such a small thing, why do you keep doing it after I've told you it bothers me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a second, there was nothing. No explanation. No justification. Just silence. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. Because in that silence, I had my answer. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And patterns don't come from nowhere. They come from how someone actually sees things when they're not trying to explain themselves. That night, something changed in me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once you realize someone is comfortable reducing you for the sake of how they're perceived, you start to question everything that came before it. And more importantly, everything that comes after. About a month after that second conversation, Daniel told me he had to travel for work. One of the restaurants his company managed was opening a new location outside Phoenix. They needed experienced staff to help set things up, train the new team, make sure everything ran smoothly before the official launch. He was excited. I could hear it in the way he talked about it, the energy, the way his voice lifted slightly when he described the opportunity. It mattered to him. And I understood that. I had always respected his ambition. "Just a few days," he said, standing in the doorway while I folded laundry that evening. "Maybe a week, depending on how things go." I nodded. "That's good." He watched me for a second like he was expecting more, a bigger reaction, something warmer. But I kept my tone steady, neutral, because at that point, something inside me had already started to detach. Not emotionally exactly, just logically. We weren't arguing anymore. On the surface, things had settled. But underneath, the earlier conversations hadn't resolved anything. They had just clarified things, clarified how he saw the situation, clarified how I felt about it, and more importantly, clarified what that meant for the future. The night before he left, I helped him pack. Shirts folded neatly, shoes placed carefully in his bag, toiletries organized the way he liked them. We moved around each other in a quiet rhythm that felt almost normal. Almost. Every now and then he would say something about the trip, what he expected, who he'd be working with, how busy it might get. I listened, responded when it made sense. But my mind wasn't really in the conversation. It was somewhere else, running through the same thought over and over. If respect has to be explained more than once, is it really there? The morning he left, I drove him to the airport. Traffic was light, the sky just starting to brighten as the sun came up over the city. He talked the whole way. About work, about plans, about things that felt distant now, even though they were happening right in front of me. When we pulled up to the drop-off area, he grabbed his bag and turned toward me. "Call you when I land," he said, leaning in to hug me. I hugged him back. "Yeah, have a good trip," I replied. And that was it. No tension, no argument, just quiet. But as I watched him walk toward the entrance, something settled into place with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt before. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. It was resolved. On the drive back home, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just drove, thinking about one thing. If someone is comfortable making you smaller in front of others, what does that say about how they see you when it actually matters? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had my answer. And once you have a clear answer, the next step becomes simple. I walked inside, set my keys on the counter, and made coffee. Then I sat at the kitchen table. The house was completely quiet. No background noise, no conversations, no distractions, just space. And in that space, I made a decision. I opened my laptop, searched for a local attorney. Phoenix had plenty. I picked one with solid reviews, straightforward experience, no unnecessary complications. I scheduled a consultation for that afternoon. The meeting was exactly what I expected. Clear, direct, efficient. I explained the situation. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Just facts. We weren't married, but we shared a lease, expenses, a life that had been built over several years. Ending it would still require structure. Division of belongings, shared accounts, logistics. Things I understood well. By the time I left this office, everything was already in motion. On the way home, I stopped at a hardware store. Not for anything symbolic. Just boxes, packing tape, labels. When I got back to the house, I didn't hesitate. I started with the bedroom closet. Daniel had more clothes than I did, so that took the longest. I folded everything carefully, placed each item into boxes, organized by type. Shirts, pants, jackets, shoes. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Because this wasn't about anger. It was about completion, one step at a time. The same way I approach a system that needs to be taken apart without damaging anything. Clothes first, then shoes. Then the bathroom, his side of the cabinet. Toiletries, personal items. Everything packed, labeled. By the end of the first evening, the guest room was half full. Daniel texted me that night. "Landed. Hotel looks decent," I replied. "Glad you got in safe." Nothing more. No tension. No indication of what was happening. Because there was no reason to create conflict before it was necessary. The next day I continued. The desk he used for work. Papers sorted and stacked. Electronics placed carefully into protective wrapping. Kitchen items that were clearly his, packed separately. Small things from the living room. Decorations he had chosen. Books he had brought into the space. Each item handled with the same care. Because if this ever turned into a dispute, I wanted everything to be clear. Nothing missing. Nothing damaged. Nothing that could be used to create unnecessary complications. By the second evening, the guest room was full. Boxes stacked neatly against the walls. 6 years of someone's presence, reduced to organized rows. It felt strange, not sad, not overwhelming. Just quiet. like finishing a long process that had been building for longer than I realized. On the legal side, things moved quickly. The paperwork was filed the same day as my consultation. The next step was timing. Daniel was scheduled to return Monday afternoon. Sunday night, I sealed the last box, stood in the doorway of the guest room for a moment, looking at everything, making sure nothing had been missed. Then I turned off the light and went to bed. Before I slept, I sent one final message to the attorney. We arranged for the documents to be delivered shortly after his flight landed. Clean, precise, no unnecessary overlap. Then I set my alarm for work, like any other night, because as far as I was concerned, the hardest part was already done. Monday afternoon, I was at work when Daniel landed. I knew the timing. He had mentioned his flight earlier in the week, casually, like everything else between us had been lately. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed. Just landed, waiting for luggage. I looked at the message for a second, then typed back, still finishing up a job, I'll be home later. Simple, neutral. About 40 minutes after that, I received a confirmation text from the process server. Documents delivered. That was the moment everything shifted. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel, I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By the third call, the text started coming in. Gabriella, what is this? Are these papers real? What the hell is going on? I didn't respond immediately. I finished what I was doing. Closed the system panel we had been working on. Logged the job properly. Followed the same steps I always did at the end of a workday. Routine. Structure. Control. By the time I checked my phone again, there were 9 missed calls. More messages. Longer now. Less controlled. I'm coming home. We need to talk. Is this some kind of joke? I read them once. Then I replied with a single message. This has already been explained. The paperwork outlines the next steps. After that, I turned my phone to silent. When I got home that evening, his car was already in the driveway. The front door was open. I could hear movement inside. I stepped in, closing the door quietly behind me. Daniel was standing in the hallway, just outside the guest room. All the boxes were exactly where I had left them. He was staring at them, not touching anything, just staring. Like he was trying to understand how something could change this much without him being there to see it happen. Then he turned toward me, and the first thing he said wasn't about the papers. Why did you pack my things? His voice wasn't loud. It was confused, disoriented. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter and walked toward him. Because the process already started, I said calmly. It's easier to organize everything now than during an argument later. He blinked, like he was trying to catch up to what I was saying. Then the confusion shifted into anger. Are you serious right now? He asked. You filed this without even talking to me again. We already talked, I said. I know we didn't, he snapped. Not like this. I held his gaze. We talked about the issue multiple times, I said. I told you it was disrespectful. You said I was overthinking it. That's not... He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. Gabriella, this is insane. You don't end a relationship over something like that. I tilted my head slightly. Over something like what? A joke, he said immediately. There it was. That word again. Joke. I nodded slowly. I'm not ending it over a joke, I said. Then what? He demanded. I gestured lightly toward him. Over what the joke represents. He stared at me, like the distinction didn't make sense, or didn't matter. It's the same thing, he said. No, I replied quietly, it's not. The hallway went still. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before turning back to me. Yeah, you're blowing this out of proportion, he said. Normal people don't do this. They talk. They work through things. I did talk, I said, more than once. And I told you it wasn't a big deal, he shot back. I let that sit for a second, then asked the same question I had asked before. If it wasn't a big deal, why did you keep doing it after I told you it bothered me? He opened his mouth. Stopped. That same silence again. But this time it felt heavier, because now the consequences were already in motion. You're seriously doing all of this, he said finally, gesturing toward the boxes, because of how I introduced your job to people? I shook my head slightly. I'm doing this because you needed to make me smaller in front of others to feel comfortable in those moments. That's not true, he said immediately. Then explain it, I replied. He hesitated. And in that hesitation, everything I needed was already there. Because if there had been a real explanation, he would have given it. Instead, he deflected. This is ridiculous, he said. You're acting like I betrayed you or something. I held his gaze. You did, I said quietly. That seemed to hit something. Not anger. Something closer to disbelief. By making a joke, he asked. By showing me how you see me when it matters, I corrected. Silence filled the space again. Daniel looked past me, into the living room, like he was trying to reset the situation. then back at the boxes, then at me. You planned all of this while I was gone, he said. Yes. That answer landed harder than anything else. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he grabbed his keys from the table. I'm not staying here, he said, not with you acting like this. I nodded once. That's fine. He walked toward the door, paused briefly near the guest room, looked at the boxes one more time, then shook his head and left. A minute later, I heard his car start, then fade down the street. The house went quiet. Completely quiet. I stood there for a few seconds, then walked into the kitchen, picked up my phone. More messages were already coming in. From him. Are you serious? We need to fix this. Call me. I read them, then blocked his number, blocked the messaging apps, not out of anger, out of clarity, because the conversation was already over. Anything else would just be repetition. And repetition doesn't fix something that was never understood to begin with. The next few days were quiet. He tried reaching out from different numbers at first. Missed calls, short messages. I blocked those too. By midweek, my attorney confirmed he had hired one as well. From there, everything moved the way these things usually do. Structured, predictable, efficient. We didn't own the house. My car was in my name, his was in his. Our finances were mostly separate. There wasn't much to fight over. He scheduled a time to collect his things while I was at work. When I came home that evening, the guest room was empty. Just bare carpet, faint marks on the wall where the boxes had been stacked. That was the last physical trace of him in the house. After that, it was just paperwork, signatures, waiting periods, and then nothing. Looking back, I know how it sounds. A relationship ending over something that small, a single comment, a joke about fixing things. But it was never about the joke. It was about what the joke revealed. Respect doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes quietly. In small moments most people ignore. The way someone talks about you when others are watching, that tells you everything. I fix systems for a living. When something keeps failing over and over, you don't stand there hoping it will correct itself. You identify the fault. You isolate it. And if necessary, you remove it completely.